morning. Good morning. You enjoying the conference? You're going to enjoy it even more in this next hour. My name's Michelle Herzog. I'm honored to be your president this year of National Council for the Social Studies. Thank you. Didn't know I had so many family members here, did you? Anyway, it is the utmost honor that I have to introduce our keynote speaker today, and we are just thrilled that he's here. This is Jose Antonio Vargas, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, founder of DefineAmerican.com, and undocumented immigrant. Many of you saw his film yesterday. Raise your hand if you saw the film, Documented. Fantastic. If you haven't, you need to get it and look at it. It's a fabulous story, a life story, an American story of a young man who came here as a young boy, went to school, was inspired by his teachers, his school. Everything he became is because of what his life was like in California through the teachers and adults and friends who cared for him and who he cared for. He went on to become a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, working for the New York Times, CNN. He's received numerous awards, and of course, in recent years has become so famous for coming out and announcing his status as an undocumented immigrant. He has a remarkable story. He's become a national spokesperson for this effort. And just as you know, his DVD will be available for book signing in the bookstore at 11:20 following this presentation. There's a lot been going on, as you know, in the last few days especially, so we were crossing our fingers and holding our breath that he would be here. He has flown cross-country now twice to be with us today. We are so thrilled and so honored. Please join me in welcoming Jose Antonio Vargas. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Oh, wow.
So we're so glad you're here and you're going to tell your story, but the first question we want to know is, how come you're late?
Oh.
No, I'm teasing you. We know you've been up to some wonderful work, so they're excited to hear about the last 48 hours.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy
I'm going to take a picture of all of you. Hold on. Go Philippines, somebody said. So this is like a social studies Lollapalooza. How awesome is that? It's been, I have to tell you, I have to be honest, I've gotten 2 hours of sleep in 48 hours. You too, and I have coffee. It's been a pretty intense 72 hours. I'm very honored to be here. They asked us a few months ago, my friend Ted McConnell, who I love deeply, asked me to do this. And how could I say no, especially considering the role that educators have played in my entire life? If you're an undocumented student in this country, and you guys know how many hundreds of thousands there are of us across this country, your life in some ways are subjected to and depends on the mercy and the compassion of teachers who don't see papers. All they see is a student in front of them who they want to help. And luckily for me, all the teachers I had wanted to do that, and in their own ways, throughout middle school, throughout high school, throughout college, for me at least, defined American. And that's what we've been doing for the past 3.5 years. The day I outed myself, so to speak, in the New York Times, it's my second coming out, and I'm totally done. On the day we did that, we launched a campaign called Define American. And our goal at Define American, in some ways, is to use and to follow the instruction and the example of the LGBT rights movement. Can you imagine where LGBT rights would be in this country without Ellen DeGeneres on the cover of Time magazine? Without Will and Grace? So Will and Grace actually aired on television on NBC in 1999. That's the same year that gay-straight alliances started happening in high schools, at least in California, and spread across the country, right? And for me, Will and Grace is really a landmark because it told people that for every will, there's a grace. For every will, there's a grace. That means there's a straight classmate, straight best friend, straight brother, sister, straight coworker, the straight friend that advocated for the LGBT person. So if you transfer that and translate that to the immigrant rights movement, all the teachers across this country are the graces, right? Are the allies that serve to help and stand alongside their undocumented students and the ones that they want to teach. So that's why for us at Define American, politics is culture. You cannot change the politics of this issue unless you change the culture in which people talk about this issue. So long as people think we're a bunch of criminals and illegals trying to take away something from this country, nothing is ever going to change, right? And the cultural shift that needs to happen, right, in the way we think of people and their role in this society, and getting away from this bad immigrant versus good immigrant, and what's deserving and what's not deserving, right? People who have accent and not have accent. We're in Boston. People here have accents. And I think that's great, right? All of that, to me, that is a cultural conversation. So at Define American, I personally have done about 350 events in 44 states in 3.5 years, visited maybe 190 college campuses. And throughout all of that, by the way, we've been filming, we've been filming Documented. How many people here saw it yesterday? Great. It's on Netflix and iTunes if you want to check it out. But for me, the beauty of this film, and this is why we're so honored to be here, and when Ted invited me and Michelle invited us to do this, we actually launch our curriculum at this very convention. So if you go to Define America, if you go to documentedthefilm.com and you put in a code, you can actually download a curriculum that my dear, dear friend Karen Williamson, where's Karen Williamson? Karen, can you stand up? That Karen Williamson has developed. So let's talk about allies. Karen Williamson was my first boss when I was a journalist in high school. And she threw my high school graduation party. And she has a graduate degree from education at Harvard University. And when we did this film, I was like, hey, Karen, we need to figure out how we can get it to schools. And it's amazing how life works. She's the perfect person to do it. And I have a colleague here, Lara Drayson. Lara, can you stand up? Sorry, I'm going to embarrass her. I didn't tell her I was doing this. So Lara helped Karen to develop the curriculum as well. And so this curriculum is something that you all could use. We tried as much as possible to really get out of this political framework in which people have viewed this issue, right? And make it about a human story. And I have to be honest with you, I did not want it to be my story. Originally, I thought I was going to make a Waiting for Superman. Oh, I hear the nervous laughter. But usually when you do a doc, this is my second documentary, you just pick an issue, you pick 5 people that can kind of get you through the issue, and then you're done. So that's what I was going to do. We ended up selecting about 5 undocumented young people from across the country, an undocumented Mexican young man who ended up being raised in Alabama, an undocumented Nigerian woman who grew up in Washington, D.C., an undocumented German guy, yes, white people can be undocumented, who grew up in Ohio, an undocumented Korean man who grew up in New York. And we ended up following them, and then after filming that, I ended up realizing as somebody who's directing the film, that the film didn't really make sense without my mom. So it became much more personal. So this is a photo of the day that my grandfather left the Philippines to come to the United States. This was in 1984. My grandfather is the guy with the glasses. He was petitioned to come here by his sister. And my grandfather, 7 years later, became an American citizen. And he was so excited about being an American citizen that he changed his name from Teofilo to Ted, after Ted Danson from Cheers, filmed in Boston. Sometimes you gotta know everybody knows your name, right? And I'm that kid, I don't know if you could see me, like right there. And unfortunately, because it's not considered a close enough of a relationship to petition your grandchild, right? People don't, the immigration code is so complex that a grandparent can actually petition a grandchild. It's not considered a close enough of a relationship. And my mother, for various reasons, couldn't get a visa to come here. So right now she's in a 16-year waiting list. If you're from the Philippines or India or Guatemala, that's how long it is. My grandfather decided that he was going to save $4,500, which is a lot for a security guard who made no more than $9 his whole life, to get me here. And in 1993, 9 years after this photo was taken, I got here. I didn't realize that I was undocumented until I was 16, 4 years later after coming to America. And this is where, for me, the role of social studies. You know, you don't really pay attention to history until you're called upon to realize what your role is in this country. I found that I was undocumented when I was a high school freshman, which was the exact same year that my history teacher made us read this book called Letter from Birmingham Jail. And I have to tell you, when you're reading Martin Luther King, and he says things in this book that says, whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. When he writes that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. When he says, quoting St. Augustine, that an unjust law is no law at all, then it becomes really, really personal. Around that same time, I realized that I was also gay and undocumented. Because I guess my grandfather thought I could just like marry a woman, get a green card, right, through marrying a woman, and kind of keep my head down and be quiet, right? That's what most undocumented people in this country do. He didn't think that I would want to be a writer. He didn't think that I'd want to, like, say it out loud. And he didn't think that I would be gay. So when I outed myself, that kind of complicated the whole situation. But I couldn't be in the closet about two things at once, and so it was easier to come out of that closet first. So I did that when I was 18. When I was 18, when I was still in high school, I outed myself as gay. And it took 12 years to come out of this other closet, this immigration closet. And I don't know if people here remember, but I ended up coming out in the New York Times against the advice of about 26 lawyers. I outed myself in the most public way I possibly could and admitted to things that I probably should not have admitted to on print. But I did that to make a point and to show Americans what it means to be undocumented in this country, what choices you have to make, what choices you're forced to make. And that meant for me committing what people think would be quote unquote crimes, which is trying to survive in this country. And I have to tell you, as being in Boston today, I've been fascinated by Irish American history. I just finished reading a book called How the Irish Became White, and studying the potato famine and figuring out, you know, before Ellis Island, how people got here and what process did they use or not use to get here and what papers did they have or not have when they got here. And to me, when I outed myself as undocumented, I actually wasn't the only person that I outed. I ended up, outing these people. That's my high school principal and my high school superintendent. High school principal, she was among the first people I ever told that I was undocumented. This was in 1999, 2 years before there was a DREAM Act. DREAM Act was introduced in 2001. She didn't know anything about undocumented students. All she knew was that she had to get me to college. And so she, with the help of my superintendent, Pat Hyland and Rich Fisher, ended up getting me a scholarship from a businessman from the community who didn't care whether or not I had papers. They just said they have to get me to college, so they did. Then when I got through college, I ended up getting hired at the Washington Post. And it's one thing to be undocumented in San Francisco, where I grew up. It's a whole other thing to be undocumented in Washington, D.C., working for the Washington Post. So 4 months after I got hired, using fake papers, and frankly, I used the fake papers and I was thinking, aren't they gonna catch it? And I just kind of kept waiting. You know, this is after 9/11, and you're thinking, aren't they checking information? And I guess they weren't. So much for national security concerns. So after I got hired at the Washington Post, I started freaking out. Actually, around this time, it was October 2004. So this guy in the glasses, his name is Peter Pearl. He was hired at the Washington Post in 1981, the year I was born, by Bob Woodward. So he had been there for a while. I took him out for a coffee, for a walk. Took him to Starbucks, bought him coffee, sat him down at Lafayette Park, which is the park across the street from the White House. And I told him everything. I told him about the fake Social Security number that I used to get the job. I told him about the fake driver's license that I used to be able to drive around. I told him about lying on government forms so I can keep getting jobs. Everything I told this man. And then I thought he was going to say, okay, like, let's report you now. Instead, he said two things. One, you make so much more sense now. Because apparently he was like, you're always just so worried, you know, your eyebrows, it's like, you know, it's like. The second thing he said, don't tell anybody else. He's Jewish, and I guess he taught me what the meaning of mensch is. And you know, after he told me this, he and his wife, Nina, welcomed me to their house for my first Thanksgiving in the East Coast. I spent my first Thanksgiving in Washington, D.C. with them. And every single thing that I did at the Washington Post, whether or not it was being on Sarah Palin's campaign trail in Ohio, whether or not, you know, getting on Hillary Clinton's campaign plane, covering her in Wisconsin, or when the Washington Post decided that they were going to nominate me for a Pulitzer using the fake Social Security number. All of those times, Peter was usually my first phone call. When I would get promoted, I remember when the editors of the Washington Post said, hey, we want to send you to Iraq to cover the war. I can't leave the country, right? So I told Peter, and we came up with just tell them that you don't want to live overseas, you know? Just tell them that you've traveled enough, and, you know, that's what I did. And it worked. I became a political reporter instead. So when I outed myself in the New York Times, I outed all of these people with their permission. And can you imagine how many other Peter Pearls and Pat Hylands and Rich Fishers are walking around the country? Probably many of them sitting right now, right here. Many of you are, right? And whenever we think about this issue, how many times do we talk about you? How many times do we talk about all these allies that we have, right? That the media doesn't cover. Right? And when people think about this issue, they don't think you're a part of it. Well, you are a part of it. So when I outed myself, I also outed them. If you saw the film, they're also in the film. And this film was 3 years in the making. Thank God for Lara, been there for me from the very beginning of making this film. We got it out. I think CNN aired it in late June. And it's been a pretty crazy, intense 3 years, and so I was gonna go take a break. I was gonna take 2 months break. I decided that my next film, I'm doing my next documentary for MTV, and I'm doing a film on what it means to be young and white in post-Obama America. What is white? That's what my next film is gonna be about. It has caused some controversy if you wanna Google it. But as far as I'm concerned, the film is a way to talk to young white Americans about their own immigrant backgrounds. White is not a country. People like me, people of color, always get asked where they're from, and we never seem to ask white people where they're from. Where are you from? How did you get here? Do you know what the sacrifice was? I know it every day. Do you know what the sacrifice was for you? Do you value it? And what are you gonna do with it? So I was gonna prep, and I've been preparing for this documentary for MTV, took a break, and then the border crisis happened. I don't know how many people here were paying attention to the border crisis in DC. So this for me, by the way, I saw this headline on CBS News, and this for me was the tipping point. I just couldn't understand how the media and how we can talk about these children as if they're insects off our backs. When did children become illegal in America? So I saw this headline, and I decided, hey, you know what? I'm gonna go down there in Texas, and I wanted to film what was happening in these refugee shelters, right? So I did. I went down there. How many people here have been to the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas? Okay, I've never been there before. I didn't realize what it meant to live in a militarized zone until I went to the Rio Grande Valley. So if you're undocumented in South Texas, your life is basically relegated to a 100-mile radius. Your life is measured by all the checkpoints that surround you. So when I got there, people were like, oh my God, we're so happy you're here, but how are you gonna get out? And I was like, what are you talking about? I'm gonna get out the same way I came in. Like, oh no, you can't. I didn't realize that there would be, when I fly out of Logan Airport a few hours from now to go home to San Francisco, there's gonna be a TSA agent that checks my passport. The only piece of ID I have with me is a Filipino passport. People forget that to be undocumented means you don't have any documents. So the Philippine passport is the only thing I have. I'm gonna show it to the TSA guy, and hopefully he or she will let me in, right? Well, in Texas, a Border Patrol agent sits next to the TSA agent. So the moment I presented the TSA agent my passport, the Border Patrol sees it, and the Border Patrol guy asked me, are you here illegally? And since I'm done lying now, I said, yes. And before I know it, I end up getting arrested, getting handcuffed, and ironically, being detained in the exact same prison, because there are prisons. Actually, they're not detention centers, they're prisons where these kids are at. So I want you to imagine 10, 11, 12-year-old boys, mostly boys, there were some girls, in prison cells, right? Packed prison cells. Why? Because we as a country have not been able to ask the hard questions. Instead of calling these kids a bunch of illegals and declaring a border crisis, we haven't asked questions like, what does U.S. foreign policy and U.S. trade agreements have to do with migration patterns? What are the root causes of migration? Why did Guatemala and El Salvador get to be so violent? Who funded the wars? Who sold them the guns? Now, this is where history, this is where social studies, this is where knowing precisely not only the history of this country, but the history of this country in relation to the countries that have been impacted by the foreign policy and economic policies of these countries. That's why all of this matters. Instead of asking questions about why are the kids coming here, can you imagine? My mother, when she decided to make the ultimate sacrifice and put me on a plane, she put me on a plane. It was Continental Airlines. The food was actually amazing. I had never had airline food. But then can you imagine these kids? What did the parents say? The parents said, walk. It's such hell here that I'm gonna let you go and I'm gonna ask you to walk. They didn't come to America to, go to Disneyland and have PlayStations. They came here to save their lives. And what did we say? Go back home. What did President Obama say? What did Hillary Clinton say? Hillary Clinton, who her whole career has been fighting for the dignity of young people. Secretary Clinton said, send them home. To what? And this is a question I really must have to ask. If these kids had come from Canada, if these kids were white, would we have sent them back? I don't know about you, but as I was sitting in a jail cell, surrounded by these kids, all I could think about was first history, that when history decides to record what has happened in the past few years, specifically as it relates to immigration reform in this country. And immigration reform to me is really not immigration. It's about what this country has always been about. It's always been a test of what America is and what our values are. That what happened this past summer is going to be something that we are not going to be able to fully explain what actually happened, right? By the way, how many times have you heard about these kids in the past few weeks? I follow it pretty closely, and thank goodness for the ACLU. I don't care if you're a Republican or Democrat, conservative or liberal, I don't really care. As far as I'm concerned, anybody in this country should care about First Amendment rights. So ACLU. So ACLU, 2 weeks ago, had a report. People don't understand that to be in this country illegally or to be here as a refugee, right, you have to go through the courts. That's why, for example, to be, quote unquote, here without authorization is actually a civil offense, not a criminal one. So we have to get in front of judges. So we are so deporting these kids to such an extent that many of them don't have lawyers. So I read 2 weeks ago of a 3-year-old boy who had to get in front of a judge in Los Angeles with no lawyer. I'm not kidding. Can you imagine? The 3-year-old boy had to get in front of a judge, didn't speak any English, to defend himself and to justify to this country why the boy should not be deported back to El Salvador. I want you to think about that when you think about these kids. All I know is all I could think about was these kids yesterday when I was in Las Vegas. And I was listening to President Obama give an announcement about the executive order. So because of the president, the same president, mind you, that has deported more than 2 million people in 6 years, more than any other president, President Obama has decided that that's enough. No more needless deportations, or at least as far as he could go. And he decided to announce an executive order protecting 5 million people across this country from deportation. And God bless him for that. And I am now a beneficiary of this executive order. And because of the order, I can now be here. It's, I have to tell you, I don't really know. I heard about it from a White House briefing. I was in D.C. the day before yesterday. They called a briefing off the record, so there was 50 of us, and the White House staff told us what was going to happen. And I was sitting in the back of the room because I didn't want to be in front, and I just didn't want to have anybody, I just wanted to sit back and just listen to this. And they said, people like Jose Vargas can now have a work permit, a driver's license. God, is there anything more American than driving? And can apply to go outside of the country. So I've lived there since I was 12. I've seen so much of America, and I'm happy that I have. But I have not been able to leave the country. And I haven't been able to see my mom. So now I can see my mom. Within 90 days, I can see my mom. And then, there's been a lot of, it's been all over the press. I've got a lot of calls from reporters, and this reporter asked me, how does this feel? And all I could give is an analogy. This is the best analogy I can come up with, is I feel like we all live in the same house. Whether or not we like it, we live all in the same big house. And I feel like the government came into my room and turned on the lights and said, hey, you're there. And I look back and I'm like, yeah, dude. I've been here. It's just been really dark. And then you know what I started thinking about? It's been really dark. But then there's all these people, like my high school principal, my high school superintendent, my choir teacher, all my history teachers, Mrs. Dewar, Mrs. Fitzgerald, Ms. Gursky, Karen, my editor, all of them had been holding these candles just to keep the light on, to have some sort of light. Then finally the government said, hey, here's the light. And finally we can see each other. And then I've been doing some TV, including Bill O'Reilly. Gotta love Bill O'Reilly. And Bill O'Reilly has the most watched cable news show in America. Whether or not you like the man, he has the most watched television show. For me, it was important after the president gave his primetime speech. I go on Bill O'Reilly to be followed by Laura Ingraham. God bless her heart. So Bill O'Reilly and I get into this thing. And then he said, Jose, I'm compassionate towards you. Now you're here. But you don't deserve to be here. Oh, it's okay. You know, and for me, I couldn't really respond to it. I was like, control your eyebrows, don't get mad. Because you know, when you do Bill O'Reilly, you're not really doing Bill O'Reilly for Bill O'Reilly. You're doing Bill O'Reilly for the 3 million people that watch Bill O'Reilly, right? That's what I do Bill O'Reilly for. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna like let this, you know, sink in. Okay, great. And about 10 minutes before I got on air, I called my mom to tell her, hey, I think I'm gonna get to go home, you know, see you. So all I could think about was my mom while I was being pummeled by Bill O'Reilly. And when he said, you don't deserve to be here, I didn't have enough strength from within me, and I just wasn't present in my mind to say to him, first of all, I don't feel entitled to be here. And when people say that people like me should earn the right to be here, I think now is the time to ask the American people, what have you done to earn the right to be here? What is citizenship to you? Are you a citizen of America because you're born here? So what is it, like a lottery where you're born, right? And I actually think undocumented people show Americans what it is to be an American. Because it's a fight. It's not something that just like falls in your lap and you're born into. It's actually something that you have to earn while people call you criminals, why people think you're taking your Social Security away from them, even though you're the ones actually providing them with Social Security, paying billions of dollars in the Social Security fund, right, that people don't even know about. That for us, it is a fight. A year ago, every movement deserves a symbol. The LGBT movement has the equal rights symbol. So Define American went to the people that designed that, and we decided that it was time to offer a symbol to the immigrant rights movement. And we offered the pledge symbol. Why? I, for one, have been pledging allegiance to the American flag since I was in 6th grade. It wasn't until I was a freshman that I realized that the flag actually didn't belong to me. So to actually tell people about the pledge and to promote what we're doing at Define American and to get allies, we created this video. I directed a PSA of 20 undocumented people pledging allegiance to the flag.
Flag of the United States of America,
and to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation,
under God,
indivisible,
with liberty
and justice
for all.
for all.
I was born in Mexico City,
Kolkata, India.
Honduras,
Nairobi, Kenya.
Philippines,
Lima, Peru.
Rosario, Argentina.
I work as a housekeeper, college student,
math teacher,
congressional intern,
Aspiring biochemist.
I've been in the United States for over 25 years.
24 years.
13 years.
This is the place where I became who I am. This is the place I grew up and I understand the meaning of giving, of making a change.
Pledging allegiance to a flag that has not yet recognized me means living in fear.
Shows me how much work there is left to do.
When I see the American flag, the first word that comes to mind
is pride.
Dreams.
Health,
heart,
patriotism,
unity,
liberty and freedom and many opportunities. Yeah.
Pledging allegiance means I am a part of America.
It's a small yet meaningful way to show that I am an American.
I may not have been born in America, but America was born in me.
How do you define American?
How do you define American?
How do you define American?
Take the pledge.
Join us at defineamerican.com.
If you're a social studies teacher looking for content to talk about immigration, this is a free video. You can go on YouTube and you can play it to your students. And I think, again, this question of not only immigration, but the idea of citizenship and what that means, right? What it means to be an American citizen, what does it mean to earn citizenship, and what America looks like today, right? So yesterday, when I was listening to the president, and I was like maybe 3 rows from him in his speech, I kept thinking about the kids from the border crisis, Because when I was arrested, when they arrest you, they take your shoelaces in your belt. Because they're afraid you might hurt yourself or other people. And then when they released me 8 hours later, because they decided that there's 4 million Filipinos in America and they didn't want to, keep a Filipino in the cell. I'm kidding. The government just decided that they had to release me, and they did. When they released me, they didn't give me back the shoelaces. But I have to tell you, I'm actually wearing the exact same shoe I'm wearing when I got arrested, because I wanted to sit there to listen to the president speak while I'm wearing these shoes in the exact same cell where I came from. I am always aware, painfully aware of where I come from. I'm aware of the sacrifice and the financial, moral, political, cultural price that my grandparents paid for it. I'm aware of the sacrifice that my mother paid for it. I'm aware of the sacrifice of all of my teachers have paid for it. And when I was sitting there, and then the president says, okay, now you can stay, I have to admit to you, I look at this flag in a completely different way. And I just hope and pray that in these coming weeks and months, that people who don't feel like this is their issue, people who feel like they shouldn't speak up, or maybe it's too uncomfortable, or it's too political, that they speak up. 3 years ago, I always get asked, hey, should people come out as being undocumented? As somebody, as I said, who has come out of 2 closets, I'm very careful about this. Because when you come out as undocumented, there's actually legal repercussions, right? Until President Obama's announcement, every day 1,000 people get deported. Every day, 1,000 people get deported. But now I've actually changed my mind. And I've said, and I will continue to say, that now, more than ever, we need undocumented people to come out to their own neighbors, to their coworkers, right? And we will protect them. There's now enough of us in the community that we would protect them. And I ask that you also protect them. And I ask that you pledge allegiance to us in the same way that we pledge allegiance to you. And I ask that you, I don't know what I would have done without my teachers. I don't know what I would have done in the past 3 years if I didn't have history to read and to ground myself and to know that we must endure and we will endure whatever we must endure in this country. And more than ever, we need your help. Martin Luther King said that history will record that in this period of great transition, which is where we are right now, the greatest tragedy is not the strident clamor of the bad people, but the appalling silence of the good people. Silence is no longer acceptable. And I'm glad to say, for the very first time, I am not yet an American citizen. I can't wait to be that. But according to this president, I will not be deported. So I thank you, my fellow Americans, for having me here this morning. Thank you. Okay. No. Oh, sit. It's okay. Sit. There's mics for questions. Please ask whatever uncomfortable question you have. And can you tell me, like, your name and where you at, like where you are and where you teach? Great.
Yes. Hi, I'm Sue Cannon. I'm from outside Philly. Thank you for your work. My question revolves around the use of the word Americans versus United States citizen. And I'm always saying to my students, hey, Guatemalans are Americans,
Yes.
Mexicans and Canadians. And my colleagues in different countries are all saying, hey, you're not Americans. We're all Americans. So how did you decide that you were going to say define American?
That's precisely the reason why. So I have, so you're outside of Philly?
Yeah.
I spent a month in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, at the University of Alabama. And one of the things that we really had to realize is how do we talk about this issue and preach beyond the choir, right? Because I remember, I'm from San Francisco. My history book in high school was Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. Can you imagine? That was my history book.
Great.
And I didn't know it was liberal until I moved to Washington, D.C. People were like, that's your history book? And I'm like, and now that I read it once a month. I usually reread it once a month just to kind of, again, ground myself.
Yes.
I'm like, how can you not read it? How can you not be that awake, right? But I started realizing that if I'm going to get through to people, there's a certain kind of American exceptionalism that thinks that America revolves around the United States of America.
Yes.
And so that's why even remember, our logo is Define American ? Not Define American, period.
Yeah.
So that's precisely exactly why we named it that, so that we can have this conversation about America is, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. America is Central America, right? America is South America. America's Canada. So that's precisely why we did that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, my name is Abby. I'm from San Francisco.
Oh, hey, what's up?
Holla.
Hey, if you want to teach the movie, I can go to your class or something.
You are in 2 weeks.
Oh, I am in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Karen will be there with me. Okay.
Well, thank you so much for being here in the midst of your 72-hour whirlwind ecstasis. It's such an honor. And I was wondering, I know the NCLR has issued a statement about the
National Council of La Raza. People don't know that.
Oh yeah, it's for lesbian rights.
Oh,
and sorry.
The other NCLR. Yes.
Other NCLR. I'm sure other LGBT gay rights and so on organizations are going to do the same on the executive action and how it is unintentionally discriminatory towards the LGBT community because it relies on bloodlines and not on other forms of relations for people who are, will be considered eligible under the new order. So I was wondering if you could make a statement on that and if you will make any kind of official statement on that because...
Me? Official statement? Is that what you said?
No.
But I have to tell you, this is where... So yesterday in Las Vegas, a friend of mine, Jose Patiño, drove from Arizona and interrupted the president's speech. Because Jose is an undocumented person but qualifies for DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, but his mother is not covered by what the president just announced because parents of undocumented people are not covered. Only parents of U.S. citizen and long-term permanent, LPRs, they call them green card holders, are eligible. So there was maybe at least 20 mothers that came there with their kids and asked the president, what about my mom? And the president, unfortunately, decided that, they just couldn't cover everybody. And so, for example, the LGBT community is also not a beneficiary in some ways of this because it relies to, as you said, family ties, right? And even marriage, the whole idea that that's still something that is still really a struggle for us. And I don't know really what to tell you, but I don't really know how our elected officials justify this. I don't know how they pick which groups of people to screw and not to screw. I don't know. Is that a horrible thing to say? I don't know. When I grew up with the DREAM Act, it was 21 years old, and then 25, then 28, then 33, then back to 30, then 35, then back to 30. And I always imagine, are they sitting in the back of the room with a hat and they just pick out a date? How do they come up with this? Yeah. Right? So I guess all I can say is that we just have to wait. Yeah. But there is one thing to me, and I'm actually hoping to produce a show like this. Most of the leaders of the undocumented youth movement, of the Dreamer movement, are openly gay. Somewhere up there, James Baldwin and Harvey Milk are smiling. Isn't that amazing? Most of the leaders of the DREAM Act movement are openly gay, and most of them have had to come out first as gay, like me, then struggle with the undocumented closet. Wow, it's fascinating. It's a perfect Bravo reality television show. Don't you think? So I'm going to do that. I think we're going to produce one. Yeah, Karen? Oh, I have 3 minutes. Yes, Karen. Great. I'm going to go to the bookstore after this. Thank you, Karen. Awesome. Yes.
Carolyn Herbst, New York City. I'd like to comment on this. Within the past hour, the House of Delegates of the National Council for the Social Studies just passed a resolution that, if you don't know about it, I want you to know, You mentioned the children at the border
Yeah.
and the humane treatment of it. When we passed a resolution to be sure these children have humane treatment and that they are educated.
Oh, wow.
And I want you to know that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I'm happy to have written I'm happy to have written that resolution for the Association of Teachers of Social Studies, United Federation of Teachers. We're the local New York City Council and the New York State Council for the Social Studies. And I wanted you to know that we did get the support of the House of Delegates.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Jose, I want to thank you for the compassion and the story. I teach in one of the jails that houses kids that are deported to Mexico.
Oh my gosh.
And I didn't know that a part of my job for the past 16 years would be to teach them how to survive when they get sent back, and having their parents come to put more expensive shoes in their personal belongings so that they can sell them on the other side of the border so they can get money to call and to eat until a family member can come to help them or retrieve them. My question has to do with language as another layer of immigration, and I wonder
Yes.
if you could comment about your experience with language.
Oh, language. You know, I grew up as an illegal faggot. That's all I heard when I was a kid. And thankfully, the faggot part is through the work and the leadership of so many people. People here may not know who Franklin Kameny is. Franklin Kameny was actually pre-Harvey Milk. Franklin Kameny would wear like a three-piece suit and lead a protest in front of the White House that has signs that said, "Gay is good." Gay is good. This was in the 50s. People thought they were actors, right? So language to me is really important. As I think Maya Angelou would say that, words are things, right? Words are things. So that's why at Define America, and we've been at the forefront of really pressuring news organizations to stop the use of the word illegal to refer to people. And looking at history books, I wonder what can we do when people talk about this issue in the history books, right? That kids are learning to actually stop using that word. I am here illegally. I, as a person, am not illegal. I think that's a pretty clear distinction, right? But yeah.
Thank you.
I think we have one. Can I do one last question? Yes, one last question. Yeah. Yes. Or Michelle is gonna
Okay,
not happy.
I'll make it quick. My name is Jose Sanchez, and I teach in Alhambra, California. And I have a question for you. A lot of us, including myself, teach in the classroom, and we come across a lot of undocumented students on a daily basis or every year. And I think one of the biggest struggles I know as an educator and with other educators that we talked about is how do we support our students? What do we say? Just because we haven't been in a similar situation. So maybe something that we can take back to our classrooms in terms of how to support our undocumented students. What do we tell them? How do we provide resources for them?
That's a great question.
How do we, comfort them?
This is really where counselors are really important. If this is not happening already, talking to the counselors and figuring out how we can actually provide an actual support mechanism. I have heard horror stories from kids who, once they tell the college counselor at the high school that they're undocumented, the counselors tell them, "Oh, I guess you can't go to college." Oh, wow. Can you believe that? There isn't a systematic approach to how to do this. And actually at Define American, we're gonna work hopefully with a couple of organizations to help do that. So, thank you.
What an amazing story. We are so grateful you made it, even though you were late and didn't have a note from the president. That's okay. You're totally excused, and we're thrilled you're here. We just want to take one more minute. Please remain seated for a little bit. I want to invite Aaron Willis and David Weiner to come up from Social Studies School Service. Yes, you can applaud. You may not be aware, but Social Studies School Service has sponsored the Spirit of America Award to one of our leading speakers for the last 25 years at the National Council for the Social Studies. And of all the speakers, they have decided to present this award to none other than Jose Antonio Vargas for exemplifying the spirit of America.
Can I say something?
Yes, you can.
So I have an idea of where this is going to go. It's going to go to Mountain View High School, where I come from, and it belongs to all my teachers at Mountain View High School. So thank you again. Thank you very much. This is so kind. Oh, thank you.
So thank you so much for coming. He's going to be down in the bookstore. I know you want to ask more questions and get pictures, so please, we encourage you to go down. Thank you for coming. Thank you for dedicating this time and being so flexible with us. Have a great rest of the day.